Good day. I'm Amy Abel. I'm the Managing Director at the Conference Board, and I'm very excited that you've chosen to join us for this month's Human Capital Watch series, where we cover on a monthly episode of all things human capital. And today we have a terrific topic, leading for success in mergers and acquisition. I'm going to explore that a little bit more with my colleagues and researchers, so it's terrific that you've joined us in this conversation. Before I jump into the topic, if you want to earn credits, you can see on our slides the HRCI, SHRM, and CPE. Please let us know which credits you would like and indicate your preference. So what are we talking about today? Leadership attributes for M&A success. We're going to talk about the explosions of activity that have been going on in M&A today, and have we not paid more attention to the leadership aspects during M&A transactions? What are the obstacles to that? How are successful companies doing this? So we have a new research effort that we're actually providing to you a sneak preview. The report has not come out, but will be out very shortly. We're very excited about this new report, but you're getting the sneak preview about what should we focus on from a leadership perspective for M&A success, and actually understanding the behaviors and the skills around that. So with me, I want to introduce my colleagues, Marion Devine, who is Senior Human Capital Researcher for Europe based out of our Brussels office. And Marion comes with a wealth of experience in the M&A area. She has a track record as an independent business writer and journalist. She's worked as an associate senior researcher for Asrich at a leading European business school. And her most recent books focus on human capital challenges facing companies as they operate in complex and turbulent businesses, just like in M&As. She co-authored several books published by The Economist, Managing Uncertainty and Managing Talent. Welcome, Marion. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Amy. And I did a few years ago as well a book for The Economist on successful mergers, looking at the people element of mergers and acquisitions.
Perfect. That's why we have you on the team. Thank you. I also have Dr. Keith Dunbar with me, who is Distinguished Principal Research Fellow for the Conference Board. Dr. Dunbar is an award-winning expert on leadership and human capital, and during his 30-year experience, he's led global talent management innovation for public and private sectors. He is a proud veteran of having served 20 years in the U.S. Navy for the Naval Intelligence. And his expertise focuses on quantitative assessment of the leadership skills required for successful M&A deal value attainment, which was the subject of his doctoral research at the University of Pennsylvania. So thank you, Keith, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Really happy to be here and look forward to sharing some of our insights with people here today.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. So let me turn it over to Marianne to set us up. Tell our audience what's been going on in the M&A world and why should we be focusing on this from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Just moving on to the next slide, you'll see that there is a graph by Thomson Reuters, and it's showing that in this year, in 2018, we have absolute record numbers of M&As. And in fact, by September, the updated figure is 3.3 trillion worth of deals have been agreed. That's US dollars. So this is actually the highest activity we've seen really since the global financial crisis. And I think that the largest number of deals are in commercial services, finance, technology services. And I think certainly we're seeing in Europe that financial services are really being driven by the quest for accessing new technologies and innovation just to help combat digital transformation. And we're also seeing some amazing mega deals, which are transactions worth more than $5 billion. And in fact, our own members, we're seeing a lot of activity among our own members. And two of the biggest deals, Walt Disney's $85 billion takeover of 21st Century Fox, they're one of our members. And also another member is Bayer's takeover of Monsanto, which is at $62 billion. So those are two of the biggest deals that we're seeing, and it's great that they're also our members. So it's a real record time for M&A activity. So So, Amy, we basically, looking at this upsurge in activities and hearing from our members that they were embarking on lots and lots of deals, if we move to the next slide, we set about having a look at what the literature says about leadership as a strong factor to M&A success. So we weren't looking at leadership just as something that helps you through integration. It was about leadership and does it actually help you to achieve your M&A objectives, to achieve financial success. And we found that actually that there is some interesting evidence out there, empirical evidence, certainly shows that managers, that leaders really have a huge role to play in managing culture, shaping the culture of the new organization. And we know that culture-related problems are a big factor in M&As. But they also play a critical role in merger integration by the fact that if there's evidence to show that if you have an aligned leadership team, that they set the tone for the whole organization, and that really helps get employees behind them as they go through what is very, very difficult change often. And also leaders play an absolutely vital role in keeping employees engaged and motivated. And we've done enough work at the conference board to know just how important engagement is among employees. But during a time of rapid change or difficult change, or even those times in an M&A when nothing is happening, but employees are sort of strained to see what's going to happen next, it's just really important to keep them engaged, to keep them motivated, and leaders play a vital role in that. So it seemed to us that there was a very strong case to say, M&A leadership, leaders in M&As play a vital role, and just as the downside of how important it is that also therefore there's risk. If you don't manage your leadership, you're taking on quite some risk there. And on this slide, we have a quote from one of our interviewees in a big tech company saying that the success of our deals has more and more dependency on inbound leaders. That's the leaders in the acquired businesses than in the past. But they've done many, many deals, and they were saying that more and more, as our deals are becoming more complex, the markets are more complex, the people that we're acquiring are absolutely vital, and it's vital that we keep these people and that we let them do what they do so well in the new acquired business. So I think overall we realise that the role of leadership in M&A is really important, but it's not well understood. And that is partly because it's so spread and distributed during an M&A. People wheel in and out of leadership roles through the integration process. So leadership is actually quite complex, but it's not well understood. And when it comes to M&A advice, so much of it is around stuff that's quantifiable or transactional or lends itself to very specific recommendations. Leadership is harder to get your hands around, and some of it may be behavioural, and therefore there's just a lack of really getting good evidence around how leadership plays out through an M&A. And I think as well, we realise that there don't seem to be very many actionable frameworks for thinking about how leadership plays out and how you actually manage leadership through an M&A transaction. So moving on to the next slide, we decided that we really needed to have a look at why are organisations finding it so sort of hard to really get to grips with leadership as a driver of M&A success. And we wanted to know as well, what are the key leadership behaviours and the skills at each critical phase of M&A transactions? How does it look through, the whole start to finish, when you're first thinking of the deal, formulating the strategy, pulling it together, due diligence, right through to the initial changeover and right through to the longer integration phase. How do key leadership behaviours play out in that whole procedure? And then who and how do you assess these key leadership behaviours and skills? How do you set about doing that? So those are the questions that we asked for our research. So we sent out a survey. We have the responses for 108 companies that have all experienced with M&A transactions. And as you can see from the slide, one of the biggest respondents in terms of business sectors was from the tech sector and the healthcare and pharmaceutical sectors. And that, I think, reflects what's going on out there and the high level of activities in these industries where there's a lot of disruption, there's an intense need for growth, for consolidation, for competing through innovation. So that made sense to us that we had a good number of respondents from those sectors. We also had, large employers responding to the survey, and you can see that one of the largest groups is have revenues of $1 billion, less than $5 billion US dollars in 2017, and they have big employers as well. So a third employ somewhere between 25,000 and 75,000 employees, so big companies. And the people that responded were also mainly HR or those involved in strategy and corporate development. So that was our makeup of respondents that filled in our survey. And then we also followed up with some interviews. So that's basically how we embarked on our research.
Great. Thanks, Marion. If I could move to the next slide, we can jump into some polling. I wanted to invite the audience to join us in this conversation. And the first question you can see, you just click on the choice. How important are the leadership capabilities of the acquire and target leaders in achieving deal outcomes? So based on your experience with M&A, can you choose the level of importance that you have seen as it impacts the deal outcome? Thank you for the audience typing in or clicking in your responses. We'll give it just about 3 more seconds and then we'll close out the poll. All right, control room, thank you so much for that. And you can see that 64% of you said that it was extremely important on the leadership capabilities, and 36% said very important as well. So thank you for that. Let me ask you one other polling question, and then I'll get some commentary perhaps from Keith to see what his thoughts were. So the second polling question, please. How effective are your acquire and target leaders at achieving deal outcomes? So once again, appreciate your quick clicking into this. And we'll give it like 4 more seconds and then we can close out the poll. Okay, thank you, control room. So you can see about 54% of you in the highest bucket said moderately effective, and a good almost 31% of you said very effective. So that's actually pretty good. So let me ask Keith for some reflective thoughts on this, and how does the audience perhaps reflect upon some of the research that we did?
Yeah, so I think this really reflects what we found in the research, as well as asking these 2 questions at the HR M&A forum that we just did here in November, right? And we see this gap between how people perceive the importance of leadership in deals and how effective they think their leaders are at being able to achieve those deal outcomes. And so it's not a surprise that we see a similar gap here, and I think plays to the importance of this research and helping them close that gap. So
exactly. Yeah, and so I think as in all things leadership, we all conceptually understand and agree that leadership is important, because who's going to say leadership is not important? But what we found in our research is the sort of lack of awareness on the strategic importance of leadership. Those of us that do M&A work, we tend to get a little bit bogged down in the retention percentages or the how long do we retain before we pay out type of very transactional type questions. And we find that strategic need for the types of leadership behaviors, like leadership skills, that's kind of the gap that we're opening up, that we're not seeing that organizations are paying a little bit more attention to. Great, so if I can ask the control room to go back to the slides for a second. And let me turn it over back to Marion to talk a little bit more about this, on sort of the findings of our research and sort of introduce the leadership aspects and what our study said.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah. So looking at our key findings, I think that companies are absolutely clear that leadership capabilities are very important. And I think one of the things that struck me, having done M&A work a few years back, is that once leadership might have been considered as something, post transaction, when you're in the integration phase, well, let's start thinking about all the leaders that are coming in and out of this M&A. But now our survey results suggest that companies are increasingly considering leadership as a driver in the decision of whether to buy or merge. So I think that's one quite significant findings of the research. I think also we're seeing that companies are really beginning to consider leadership in its broadest sense. It's not just the integration manager. It's not just that integration team, regardless of how small or how very big it can be. But it's actually, in its broadest sense, we're seeing in our survey that it's a combination of different leaders, both in the target and the acquiring organisation. It's both. And they are taking a shared responsibility for the success of the deal. And the other thing as part of that, who are these leaders, is that the most successful acquirers in our survey were much more likely to engage with middle managers than those that are sort of slightly or moderately effective. There was quite a clear difference that middle managers, for those who are more successful, middle managers are important. And then the third point is that we explored the fact that some leadership skills and behaviours are critical at different phases of the M&A stage, right from the stage of formulating the deal to integration. And so we saw some very interesting findings here. And really, I think the takeaway is that this really does suggest that companies would benefit from digging deep into the organisation and finding the right skills to draw on at each stage of the deal. So those, Amy, in a nutshell, were our sort of, I think, main headline findings. So drilling down a little bit more onto the next slide, I think we found that, as I said, that this bigger, more expansive thinking about leadership capability. Overall, nearly 6% of the survey respondents said the leadership capability of the target company was really important in deciding whether to buy their most important or strategic acquisition. And that's what I'm saying, that therefore, companies are increasingly considering leadership as a driver in that decision. And I think it also suggests, if you stretch that point and that logic, that leadership capability is an important part of value creation in M&As. So companies put a lot of thought into how they are creating value through traditional levers such as cost and scale. But it seems now that the more successful and the more experienced acquirers are really beginning to consider how to leverage leadership synergies in the new business. So moving on to the next slide. I think something else that we saw that was interesting was that we also wanted to know what was the reason for the merger, what was the strategic reason for the merger. And I think that it's clear, we could see through our survey results that in certain type of deals, leadership capability is relatively more important. So the rationale for the deal does have a bearing on how you deploy leadership capability. And the quality of target leaders is most important for certain transactions for acquiring talent. And I think something that to me is very significant, industry transformation. That's where the quality of target leaders is particularly important. And I think that many of our members are transforming at the moment. They are either trying to move into sideways into new industries, or they're really trying to transform to make the most of new technologies, new business models. And so the quality of target leaders, if they are achieving growth through acquisition, target leaders are really, really important to them in their strategies. So moving on to the next slide. And I think that we also, we explored with our interviewees, what is it about this sort of challenge and the difficulty of thinking about leadership, understanding how leadership plays out in an M&A. And really, it's some of the standard things that make M&As so difficult. Time, pressure to complete the deal quickly. And even if sometimes, the deal gets delayed, but there's still time pressures. M&As are incredibly complex, and I think often it's an easy thing to underestimate that. But time just means that it's very hard for companies to think of sort of non-transactional elements, especially around leadership. Culture, it's very easy for companies to just think about culture. They think about culture clashes, but just not to think about the fact that leaders play a role in shaping culture. Whether it is to preserve the culture that you want, or whether it is to help achieve a new type of combined culture, or whether it's actually to go to sort of to go for something completely different, a new culture that's new to both combining companies. But leaders play a really important role in that. And also, the lack of knowledge of what leadership skills and behaviours are most important and how to assess those skills makes it very hard for companies to really to feel that it's something tangible that they can act on. And there are so many other pressures helping them think of other things. So those seem to be the main barriers, really, to companies really thinking more strategically about leadership and M&As.
Yeah, and I think, Marion, one thing that I would like to add to that is, we did some interviews. It was really interesting, the fact that we had over 40 people willing to be interviewed for this research project. And as we interviewed this initial cadre of people, it was clear that they understood the importance of leadership to successful mergers and acquisitions. But as you point out, there's a lack of structure and process around how to deal with it. And so in some cases, member organizations default to doing nothing because they just don't know what to do. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So just to focus off on the last element of this, we do, of course, see high impact. The lack of leadership focus in M&A is a risk. So this is not a soft issue, right? This is not a HR problem. This is an M&A and a business problem, because you're essentially mitigating risk when you're focusing on the leadership aspect. And we do have results that show that if you don't focus on it, what happens, right? What's the business impact? You get high turnover, loss of focus in the daily business, and of course, behavior and conflicts on the new teams. And all of this will just become a mess. We hear plenty of M&A failures, and that's actually what we want to get a handle on and want to avoid. So let me turn it to Keith now to talk us through about what some of these key findings told us, and what do successful companies do so that they have a higher rate of M&A success?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So it's interesting what the data had to tell us. So those companies that felt that they were effective in assessing the right leaders in the organization, as you notice here, the red line denoting the target company leaders and the green line denoting the acquiring company leaders. And the interesting thing is those organizations that thought that they were less successful at understanding or identifying the right sets of leaders were really not very good at identifying themselves, right, as the acquiring company. And so one of the key findings that we came out of this with is, how do you take that internal look at yourself as the acquiring company? Obviously, in a lot of deals, we know there's a huge focus on the target company executives and whether these are the right people that we want in our company. But we really need to take that inward look at ourselves and look at ourselves in the mirror to determine whether or not we're the right ones. I think another interesting finding, we wanted to know how people are assessing leaders in their companies. And so we looked at this from the perspective of those companies that are really successful, very or extremely successful at achieving their business outcomes, and those leaders are those companies that are not as successful at doing this process. And it's interesting that it really was around gathering influential stakeholder input, doing interviews, looking at past performance data. The really surprising thing from this question for me was the lack of emphasis on formal leadership assessment tools. What you see was next to last at the bottom. And in fact, even more interesting was this research of social media on leaders in both the acquire and the target company came out ahead of formal assessment tools. And I think what we see from our side of this is that it's not just about having that interview with leaders, whether internally or in the target company. It's really about taking that main view of looking at all the data that you can collect and make available to you. Another question was around the looking at leaders in the mirror, and we talked about this briefly, but focus on the target leaders again is just half that equation. And as this indicates here, those companies that were really successful at looking at themselves viewed themselves as much more effective at achieving their deal outcomes, which was quite interesting.
And if I can jump in for a second, Keith,
Yep.
which is what's interesting, not only is it, we all understand we need to focus on the target leaders, and that makes perfect sense. And I'm sure many of our viewers might be thinking, well, who has time to focus on the acquiring leaders and ourselves? So here's the good news, which is you don't have to do it at the same time, right? Because they're internal leaders. This could be done well before you even enter a transaction or an M&A possibility. These could be done as part of your normal leadership development processes and succession planning efforts, right? So that you're not in for the crunch when you actually have just a few months to close a deal, that you're now all of a sudden thinking about all these other things that you hadn't thought about before. So you can get a strong handle on it. And our data shows those organizations that do this are more successful in their M&A outcomes. So, I mean, that's a really big finding that we should all process and figure out what that means to our company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these companies apparently, and ones maybe that we haven't had a chance to interview, right? But they have a process that they're using by which they can look at themselves internally, whether this is formal talent reviews that they do from their succession planning management processes or whatever. But as Marion pointed out, it's really about finding those leaders with the right leadership strengths that you can bring to bear on these exceedingly risky business decisions that are made about putting two new companies together. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, just as an example, one of the organizations that we spoke with, they talked about how they prepare their acquirer leaders, so their own leaders, and how they prepare them for M&A, which is they actually have a rotating role. So in an M&A transaction, they have a role around execution of that, and they rotate high potential leaders into that role per the transaction. And so this not only develops their internal capabilities, it just broadens, the breadth and depth of their bench strength and how they're actually able to handle M&A activities, which is a little bit different, right? It's a lot different, I should say, than your daily, operational roles. So before we move on, I'm going to turn it back to you just to continue on to our findings, but I wanted to also invite the audience. Please join us in this conversation by typing in your questions in the lower left-hand corner. So please join us, and we'll feed the questions to our speakers, and we'll, sort of engage with you in that dialogue. So if what we are talking about has poses some questions for you, we'd love to hear from you. So please, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. So we asked this question about who do you typically assess in your M&A deals, and no surprise here, it's really focused on the C-suite, top management, executive management. We see some companies that are actually looking at middle management, frontline supervisors, maybe individual contributors as key talent that they need to retain. But what this tells us is that there continues to be this focus at the top levels, and as we talked about with the middle management, which we're getting ready to talk about, it's really about going deeper in the organization to really understand where you have those leadership strengths that you can take advantage of. So as Marion kind of pointed out, one of our key findings was around this middle management component. And so what we found is that those companies that are very extremely successful at achieving their deal outcomes spend a lot of time focused on middle management. And it's no surprise. I know even from my original research, I asked this question about my data set about do senior executives or middle managers have a greater effect on M&A success. And senior executives made a lot of sense for the acquiring company, but for the target company, it was middle managers. And if you think about this from, kind of a 30,000 foot level, it makes perfect sense. I mean, these are the people that are having to hold the target company employees together, continue to keep them motivated and engaged as you work through this very uncertain time. And so spending a little bit of extra time to focus on the middle management makes a whole lot of sense. So.
And it does make a lot of sense, but again, a huge gap, right, that we found in our research, in the literature, as well as with the companies that we spoke to. Very few organizations understand, much less do anything about this population that is actually super critical to the success of an M&A integration. It makes, again, perfect sense, but for some reason we just hadn't gotten there.
Yeah, I mean, there's other research about the role of middle management in successful transformation and innovation projects. And what they found was that those projects that were most successful, and of this study I'm referencing, only 32% of these projects were successful. The main reason they were successful is because middle managers were involved. So,
makes perfect sense.
This other one is around serial acquirers. So same thing here. So serial acquirers, whether these are companies that were making 1 to 3, 4 to 9, or 10 or more deals over the last 3 years, see an emphasis on engaging with middle management. And so I think it's, again, one of the major findings that we found from this. And again, it's just as Amy kind of pointed out, there's not a lot out there about this. So we're glad to bring this to light for people and, hopefully provide them some ideas of what they can do to make this work for them.
Mm-hmm. Let's do a poll question, and I do see the audience had typed in a question. We'll get to that after the polling. So let's do the polling question first. In no more than 3 to 5 words, can you tell us what leadership practices, if you do any, you use to engage middle managers in a deal? So in really brief words, can you type in what you have? We see some comments coming in, so thank you. Some might be none. Okay, meetings, yep, definitely. Let's do another 5 seconds. Oh, okay, more coming in. Thank you for that. Okay, great. Thank you. The control room, you wouldn't mind closing. Yes, absolutely. Lots of meetings, a lot of communications, which involves education, obviously. What succession plans, surveys, lots of different ways that we can engage in middle managers to keep going. So we can talk a little bit about some of that and also get to a question. Just to explore, for example, another example, a company example that we spoke to. What they do is they do what they call stay interviews. After the deal has closed, they want to highly engage all their leaders, senior and middle managers, and they will actually conduct interviews around staying. What is it that you care about from a career development perspective? What is it? What are other opportunities that you may want to explore from a skill development perspective? How does this work from your organization to our organization? Not the interview for a job type conversation. It's what can we do to help you think about your future with this future company or this new company of yours. So those are different types of approaches. Let me take on a question. Any tips on how to gather leadership information? And in the middle of the M&A transaction, we have to be very careful about the contact and the information that flows between the companies. So absolutely. And maybe I'll first turn it over to Keith, and then I'll turn it over to Marion for some comments. Obviously, where in the deal makes a big difference. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you might imagine, target companies are going to be hesitant to give you any kind of leadership assessment data because of the perceptions of how that information is going to be used, right? And so what we recommend is something that you can ask for prior to day one is ask for aggregate leadership assessment data. So there's this concept, and we'll talk about it more in the report, around collective leadership, right? So by getting this aggregate leadership data from the target company, you don't see names, you just know how good are they at building relationships, how good they are at leading change or fostering teamwork. So that gives you a sense of the level of risk that you may be getting into from a leadership strengths and risk area perspective. And once you do get to day one, then try to collect that data, whether that's through interviews, formal assessment instruments, looking at data from their leadership development programs that might be available to you. So you can put that complete picture together, which we'll talk a little bit more about here shortly.
Yeah. And go ahead,
and
please.
I think a comment that I would like to just put in from based in some discussions with our one particular member, you can actually think of it in a different way by saying, actually, you can empower people in the organization, in the target company, to, in a sense, own their own data and to be very thoughtful and intentional about that data. So, for example, one company worked there was a lengthy waiting period before the transaction was completed, the legal transaction. And they actually worked with people in the target company, their own managers, running very detailed sessions with people who hadn't thought about reapplying for jobs, or had been had quite lengthy tenures, and they worked to think about their own strengths, their own achievements, and it was in the context of, we know that we're going to enter this period of turbulence. We don't know quite what's going to happen to jobs, whether some of you will lose your jobs, whether you'll have to reapply for your jobs, whether your jobs will change. So we're going to invest time and a bit of money at this stage to help you really rethink about your own strengths, where you want to go, what your aspirations are. It's a very, very positive exercise, but it did mean that therefore people had a very refreshed sense of themselves and their achievements. And when the deal went through, then people actually had that data, even though it was their own data. And when the company did start thinking about restructuring jobs and roles, they could reach out to these people and sort of say, would people like to think about applying for this job or putting themselves forward? So that's a sort of another way to approach it in some. And
cases. If I can build on that, Marion, one of the companies that we spoke with also talked about something similar to what you just talked about, but they were viewing it from a high potential perspective, meaning many companies have high potential programs that exist today. So you may already be doing a lot of this leadership development work for those candidates that you have selected or deemed as high potential. Well, those leaders that you're pulling in from a target organization, I'm assuming you're pulling them in because they're also high potential. And so why not put them in through the same processes? So the types of assessments that you might do with high potentials, you might do that. The types of leadership development programs that you might put them through in terms of training and education, the types of coaching initiatives that you might assign to a high potential, you could also do with a target leader. You basically view them as in a different view versus this target leader, that they're now a high potential in your organization. Could you apply existing practices to these individuals? Because those programs are all done for development and retention, right, for your existing leaders. So it's the same concept in many regards for these target leaders. Okay, let me turn it back to Keith just to continue our conversation.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Amy. So one of the questions that we asked our survey respondents were around what leadership skills they think are most important to deal success. And so there were 25 leadership skills identified in the survey. And what we asked for this question was specific to their most successful deal or most important deal over the last 3 years. What leadership skills were most important? And so we got a rank order of the 25 skills from 1 to 25. And here are the top 10 skills that came out of that process. And so, think strategically, manage execution. And we have another chart here on the next slide, but really a lot of strategic leadership skills and results-focused leadership skills are captured here in this top 10. And what you're going to see in the next slide is that it's pretty consistent with what we asked in the next question. You will see these 10 skills over and over again. So we also wanted to know what leadership skills are most important at each phase of the deal process that goes forward. And so we had identified 5 different stages that you see: strategy, target evaluation, due diligence, integration planning, and then integration during the first 6 months, and then 7 to 24 months for integration. And this is my color coding, so please pardon that. But what we see is this clear progression of a lot of strategic and results-focused leadership skills at the beginning stages during the strategy, target evaluation, and due diligence phase. And then we see this gradual progression as we get to integration planning, and then both integration stages of more people and personal focused leadership skills, which I think we kind of expected to see this, right? That what was going to be more important once we got to integration was, your ability to foster teamwork and lead change, build relationships, team leadership, for example. But we also see some consistent leadership skills across all of these deal stages. So communicates effectively. So think about this. So what happens in a usual deal is there's a big communication strategy, and we assume everyone is a great communicator, right? And so we give them the message to communicate to the employees, and it gets jumbled and mumbled. And so in this case, what if we identified those leaders that are really good at communicating and make sure that they get the message and share that message? So, but some really interesting insights from that.
And if I could pause you for a second, the example I gave earlier about an organization that actually has a role in this M&A process for high potential to come in and do a stint, a development stint. This happens more at the strategy, target development, target evaluation, due diligence, and probably integration phase, I think, is what they were targeting. Because obviously in integration, you would go to all the business unit, and they may have different leaders. But what about, we're always thinking about, how do we help leaders become more strategic, become more visionary thinking? Well, here's a perfect opportunity for that, because this type of skill is absolutely critical for this transaction.
Right.
And so how do we develop that? It's just a way to focus in on the particular skills that you may want to develop in particular people. And so something to keep in mind for the leaders already in your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important, right? Because it's about building capability. And this is just another example of where whatever your business strategy is, and there will be an M&A strategy component of that, you need to be building capability in your people to be able to execute on this successfully, right? So.
Yeah.
And I think something that really struck me actually in these results, and as we can see that certain skills are important at certain phases, but I think something that stood out for me was that under the personal leadership skills, that there are 3 interlocking skills, a tight cluster of 3 skills all the way through, and that's communicating effectively, but it's also it's a picture of a responsive leader who listens to others, and the third one is inspires trust. And I think that just is a very compelling narrative, really, that yes, to be a really effective leader through an M&A, you really have to communicate effectively what's going on to get that big picture, to get people engaged. But you have to listen to others as well. And we all know that integration plans rarely go as expected. There are so many, there's fine tuning, there's readjustments, all sorts of things that go on. And to be able to listen to people in the business is really important. And I think by listening, it makes sense to me that also inspires trust. That if people through an M&A think they're being listened to, that their leaders want to know what they think, what they're seeing at the coalface, what they're seeing with customers, then that does inspire trust. And is a very compelling profile, I think, when it comes to personal leadership skills.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Marion. So at the end of the day, this is a very uncertain, volatile time for employees as you're going through this. You can really see that this is probably a lot about empathy, right? your ability to empathize with the employees and understand the situation that they're going through. And by doing that kind of thing, through listening to others and communicating effectively, you will build trust. And I've always said, if you build trust, you can then build relationships. And if you can build relationships, you can then lead change, motivate, and influence. So it's really kind of a baseline leadership skill that leaders need in successful deals. So
Great.
So I know one of the questions was kind of around what is it that we're going to do to, highlight the things that need to happen to be successful. And so as everybody knows, there's a lot of M&A playbooks out there. Your organization probably has a playbook itself. And so what we wanted to do with the report, which will come out sometime early 2019, is an M&A leadership playbook. And so what we have here, we've identified 10 areas that you might want to think about in order to make leadership more of an important part of your overall M&A deal process to attain deal value. And so as you see here, we've kind of lined these 10 things up with the deal stages that we identified. And there are 10 of these here. We're going to talk about 7 of them. And this is really to pique your interest to go in and get the research report, where we're going to talk about all 10 of these and the importance that they will play in making your deal successful. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first one is around leadership implications of the deal thesis and the objectives. And so what we think here is it's really about understanding what that value chain is between the deal strategy and objectives and how leadership will impact that. And when we talk about leadership impact, we're talking about impact that individual leaders will have, teams will have, business groups or units will have, and corporate functions will have on your ability for that deal to attain its value. And so we think that's really starting point and a great place to build some strategic skills within the workforce. The next one we see is around this deal success is about leadership and culture. And Marion talked about this earlier when we were talking about some of the challenges. And so, this viewpoint that if we assess the cultures of the two companies, that's going to solve all our issues with the integration piece. And what is likely to come out of any type of cultural assessment work is a very robust change management plan and a very robust communications plan, right? Well, what that negates to determine is, do you have leaders that can lead change, build relationships, foster teamwork, the kinds of things that you need to know in order to mitigate any risk associated with executing on your change management plan or your communications plan with culture. So what we say is it's not a either or, it's a both and situation where you should be doing cultural assessment and leadership assessment simultaneously. The next one is this idea of effective leadership runs deeper than the C-suite, right? So we talked about that with middle managers. We shared some insights with you from some companies that we've interviewed about how they do this work. And so it's really about how do you leverage leadership strengths across the entire spectrum of leader in the organization. And so there will be some additional details about how to do that in the playbook. The other thing that we spoke about was this acquirer looking at themselves in the leadership mirror. So I know the one question was asked about how do we get access to this data? Well, as the acquirer, you should be able to look at yourself at any point during this process, right? Looking at a particular business unit, if it was identified through that initial step that we spoke about, that they are going to be an important part of this deal value attainment, or the team, looking at them and seeking to understand what leadership strengths and what leadership risk areas they bring to the deal. Two other areas that we looked at were leveraging leadership strengths and mitigating risk areas. So like any business decision, this is about managing risk, right? And so we spend a lot of time managing the financial risk of a deal or managing the legal risk of a deal. we need to take the same approach to managing the leadership risk in a deal. And so by determining what strengths and those risk areas are, you're in a much more better position to actually identify the key steps that you need to take to mitigate those risks. Finally, we talked about this, leveraging the existing leadership assessment data. So as we talked about, if you are, from the acquirer perspective, you can go to your leadership development team, your employee engagement data, and paint a pretty good picture of where you are in this picture. And then same thing as we talked about, get that aggregate data from the target company as soon as you can. And then once you get into day one, get over there and do this analysis so you can determine where you stand as far as putting together a very specific leadership integration plan. And finally, this idea of acquire and target companies co-creating the future. So the interesting thing that we got from one of our interviews is that it's not just about the acquirer coming in and saying, okay, we've acquired you, now it's time to take our goals and objectives and you start working towards those. What they do is they bring these two leadership teams together. And by doing that, they help co-create the future of that organization's. And if you think about this, it makes perfect leadership sense, right? You create that direction, that alignment, that commitment, which will spur motivation as well as employee engagement, right? And so a lot of good things that we can do that we just haven't necessarily thought of, right? And I think the other thing that we would share about the M&A leadership playbook is we will have some tools and templates in there associated with each one of these. So for example, the top 10 leadership skills that we covered on the slide, there will be a set of behavior-based questions that you can ask about each one of those leadership skills. So when you do get in these situations where you're doing interviews, you have a handy set of leadership questions that you can ask to determine, do these people have what we think we need in order for this deal to be successful and attain that value? So,
terrific. Before we continue, I wanted to touch on two audience questions. So thank you to the audience for contributing that. And I'll first again come to you, Keith, and then if Marion has anything to add. When does it make sense for the M&A leader's role to encompass all of those different stages? Because we talked about the different stages and all the different skills they have. Often there's a corporate development strategy team that focuses on the strategy and target evaluation, which is separate from the due diligence stage, etc. And I think that's right, which is in different phases, you might need different people or different teams. What are your thoughts?
No, absolutely. It's all about taking advantage of people that have these as strengths. So if you take this strengths-based approach, which I'm a huge advocate for, it's really about taking advantage of those people that can do these things at the appropriate time, right? So if you need somebody to analyze the deal strategy and do the target evaluation, you're going to want somebody that has more strategic leadership skills or results-focused leadership skills. But as you get into the integration, you may start to see a shift in the people that you bring into the team and the people that transition out of this team in order to make sure that you're getting the right resources and capabilities applied at the right point.
Yeah. Marion, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the more I've thought about these findings, the more I think that what we're talking about is a different way to think about integration planning. And I think there is a tendency when you get the 90-day models or whatever, you get some very rigid models and they're very boxes and logical and compartmentalized. This team is doing this team is doing that, etc. It's a military plan. I think in a way what we're saying is that actually you need to take something that is a little bit more fluid and to recognize that no one team, no one individual will have all the attributes that you need to make a really successful integration and to achieve your merger objectives. And therefore that you need to just think about more flexibility and some of those sort of boundaries between one phase to another phase. And bring people in. I think, though, that in order to do that, there's a real call for everybody in the organization to understand the big picture so that you can take this more fluid approach. Everybody, even if they're not directly involved in the merger at that point, understands where you're trying to go, understands the broad plan, the strategic direction, and is engaged. I think without that, it's just not going to work. So I think, in a way, what we're talking about is a sort of new model of M&A integration.
And if I can build on that, Marion, I completely agree. I think what we may have lacked as a M&A practice and as a leadership practice in the past is first the understanding, even though we might have intuitively thought about it or seen it, of what skills might be needed at which points, and then intentionality. That's what I see sort of lacking. Companies go in at the beginning of an M&A transaction with intentionality of applying specific leadership behaviors and skills at different points.
Right.
Are we prepared to do that? Now, I realize that's easier to say than to execute. Right? Many companies may not even have a firm handle on what type of skills and capabilities they already have today inside, much less applying them at the appropriate phase of a different transaction. But what I see as an opportunity, if we're intentional about that, I come from leadership development as a background, so I'm super excited about that opportunity. Think about the different phases and the different people you can rotate, and is that a stretch assignment for someone? Is that somebody we can build and develop because they really need to gain more business experience or industry experience from that kind of M&A transaction? Yeah. And we see the explosion of M&A activities. This is impacting all companies, all industries, or many companies and many industries. So it's hitting all of us in many different ways. How can we take advantage of this very high-risk deal, but also in a development opportunity, taking advantage of strength, and in preparing our leadership pipeline, for greater opportunities in the future? So all of it just sort of connects to me, but it requires a lot more setup, a lot more intentionality, and a lot more foundational knowledge that we may or may not have today. And that I can certainly appreciate as a challenge for many companies. Great. Any last thoughts before I finish off our thing? Thank you to the audience, by the way. You had a couple of quick questions coming in, so we appreciate that, as well as your participation in this polling questions. Let me say one quick summary thought, and then I'll turn it over to Keith and Marion for their final thoughts on, how should organizations, what can they do or think about as they now prepare for this in their future. So for the audience, we obviously are giving you sneak previews, so we hated to tease you on some of these new results, and the report is not yet ready, but it is coming out in the near future, as Keith already mentioned. So we do look forward to it. And we'll also make sure that, by the way, anybody that's on this webcast will get a link to the report link when it's released, so you'll be notified of that when it comes out. So hang in there. We will have a lot more activities, tools, and other webcasts. Of course, we hope to bring in some of the companies that we've been talking to for some case study analysis and deeper dive on a format like this from a webcast. So last thoughts, brief last thoughts, Keith, please.
Yeah, so for me, it's pretty straightforward. So a lot of research has been done on M&As and why they succeed and why they fail. But at the end of the day, my very biased perspective on this is that leadership is really the foundational element that's going to determine whether your deals succeed or are part of history, right? And so by taking this report, some of the insights that we have gained from the research, as well as the M&A leadership playbook, I think you're going to be in a much better position going forward, particularly in 2019, to have your deals attain their deal value. So thanks.
Perfect. And Marion?
Oh, to be put on the spotlight this, Amy. I think for me that it's the recognition that to really make the most of your leadership in both your target company and your acquiring company, to really think much more expansively about leadership and who has these attributes, and not just think about the C-suite and the next layer down. Really look at your organizations, both organizations, and really spot those people who have the right skills that you can really deploy for maximum effect That's my takeaway.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you both. Thank you, Marion. Thank you, Keith, for joining me on this webcast. I wanted to invite our audience to our future January's next year's series, if you can believe this, of our Human Capital Watch webcast, where we will be showing the C-Suite Challenge. As many of you know, this is our annual report where we go out and ask C-Suite executives what keeps you up at night. And we're going to focus on building a future-ready organization. What were C-Suite executives thinking about? So please join us for this webcast in January. As well as you will receive a discount if you want to join us in 2019 for M&A, merger integration, and joint venture conferences that we have at the Conference Board, where we will be continuing to explore this topic as well as others in this very fast-changing and growing space. So in the last minute that we have, Keith and I wanted to raise our hand and our cup, I should say, and a toast to all of you for joining us on this webcast series for the year. This is, by the way, our last webcast for the calendar year. We're very excited about it. Happy holidays to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us throughout the year. Please join us again in 2019. Have a very prosperous, healthy, and happy new year for all of you, all your families, and we will cheer to you and eggnog and to celebrate. Thank you very much. I'm Amy Abel with the Conference Board.
Cheers.